So my expertise, besides all duties of embryology, human IVF, is also preserving embryos and eggs at low temperature. And so we always look for improvement, how we can improve these protocols in terms of survival, how we can make it more efficient, a better workflow. And so over many years, we studied cryopreservation like in the 1970s. Protocols took about 2 hours or even longer, and the successful survival was not even great. So when we introduced vitrification protocols beginning of 2000, and since then, so over 20 years, protocols didn't really change. Survival was good, there was no need to make changes to the protocols. But now we found actually that even now protocols where it took us much less time, like about 20 minutes, that we can actually cut down time to 1 minute or up to more, like maximum 4 minutes. And that was discovered a little by accident, that we can actually go so fast warming but also freezing. And the benefit is, besides extreme improvement in workflow, that embryos actually come out better, more successful, better survival, because the recovery in that short time is much better than in a long equilibration time doing warming. I want to talk about vitrification, and we talked about simulation protocols, and we talked about automatic ICSI, but we never talked about what's actually coming out of all this. Eggs, embryos, and something we have to freeze, because most of that stuff we generate in a culture dish, we cannot transfer at the same time. So we have to have something in the backyard to preserve these embryos, oocytes, or sperm for a potential later use without compromising their potential to implant and to generate babies. So, my talk today is about vitrification. Vitrification is, that's my disclosure. Vitrification is out there since 1985. It was coming in the field. Of course, most of the stuff we do was coming over the veterinary science field. And so it was Garbo Weider who introduced in '96 open pool straws, vitrifying bovine and pig's embryos. And when it moved slowly to us, we adapted it, and I think we made it more successful than ever the slow freezing protocols were before for many 20 years about. But nothing really changed in terms of cryopreservation. What are the aims? We have to create an intracellular environment that supports the transition from a liquid to a solid glass-like stage. We have to make sure the intracellular compartments must be conditioned to allow the emergency and maintenance of a vitreous state, the arrest of the metabolomics, which could be then reversed, maintain structural and genetic integrity, achieve acceptable and survival rates after warming, and of course, whatever protocol you use and implement, it has to be reliable and repeatable. I apologize that some letters here shifted. That's why I always have my own laptop. This time I don't. What's the steps usually from the culture dish into the nitrogen? It's initial exposure to cryoprotectants, because every small oocyte or embryo has the same percentage of water as your body has, about 70%. So we have to get rid of that water. We have to dehydrate the cell to freeze it successfully at a very low temperature. That's the temperature of liquid nitrogen. We store it. When we have to do the opposite, we have to rehydrate, we warm and thaw these oocytes and embryos by removing the cryoprotectant, bring the water back, and then they are ready for a transfer back in a physiological environment where they usually belong. So maybe some of you might remember this time. This is not an embryo culture device. It's not an incubator. Most of you maybe think so. It's not. This is a bunch of slow freezers back in the 90s. And I show them because they were very noisy. Rusty Pool maybe remembers that. They made a lot of noise. It was always a dance to get all the embryos from all the patients loaded at once. It took about 10 to 15 minutes. When the machine went to seating temperature, about -6. This took another 10 to 15 minutes. After seating, the machine went, and seating, if you don't know what it is, we initially initiated the growth of ice crystals by touching the straw. And then after seating, the machine went about 0.3% Celsius per minute to the temperature of -30 to 40, and then we plunged it to -196. That took about 2.5 hours. I have here a protocol that I implemented 20 years ago for zygotes. Germany was a big zygote freezer because we couldn't freeze embryos because of an embryo protection law. And you see, it took us 98 minutes to get the embryos from a culture dish to the place where they belong when we want to freeze them. And the opposite side, what would be the alternative? Liquid nitrogen bath. And I took that picture in 2000 where, I mean, most of us didn't even know what's behind the word vitrification. And, I did a simple demonstration by having a dish sitting in liquid nitrogen, and before I created 2 drops. One is pure saline, DPS, and on the right side was a solution at that time of a combination of ethylene glycol and DMSO, 20%, and 0.4 molar sucrose. And what you see is, I can guarantee you both drops are at an amorphous state. It's solid state, but the left one was created by ice crystals, obviously by the white color you see. And the right is also amorph and solid, but there is no ice crystals. That's a benefit that we can prevent, if we do it right, intracellular ice crystal formation in the eggs and embryos we freeze. And so I mentioned that in 85, 2012, we got a lot of reports, more and more successful. But then, since today, there was not much change in our protocols. We increased the volume of the drops. We moved away from merging the drops to protocols where we went with a time to make it more reliable and consistent between embryologists. But that was not really a dramatic change. We still use the same solutions. You might use slightly some different, but the basics are the same. You have a modified media that contains 20% serum substrate, the protein. You have a solution where you first expose the cells. We call it an equilibration solution. It contains 7.5% ethylene glycol DMSO. If you go with a vitrolife medium, it will be 8% ethylene glycol and propandiol. And the vitrification solution, the final step, where we actually expose cells very short, not more than 60 seconds, it's 15%. In case of vitrification solution from vitrolife, it would be 16%. And these solutions contain 0.5 or 0.65 molar sucrose. That didn't change. And what needs to happen before vitrification? As I mentioned, we have to dehydrate. We have to remove the intracellular water. We can do that with cryoprotectant. They move in. It's a very simple osmosis. And water gets pushed out. What happens because of the water loss, the cell will reduce its volume, it will shrink. And when you incubate it long enough, it will come back actually too close to its original volume, about 80–90%. And if you look at that time at these cells, you don't really believe they were dehydrated, but they are. And that's the simple things we have to consider: the hypertonic, isotonic, or the hypotonic steps. It depends, what you do. In that case, we want to freeze. In that case, we want to do the opposite. We want to reverse and warm them up. And just to give you a little bit a slide, when we vitrified blastocysts before, as I mentioned, we started with a drop to rinse them. When we merged after 3 minutes, and we kept them here in a single drop of ES in 5 minutes, and then we went through 4 drops of VS in 60 seconds. It took us 9 minutes. That didn't dramatically change. I just shortened it now to 7 minutes, but much more simpler. We have 1 drop of rinse media. It's actually ES, and then we expose it here in ES for 6 minutes, and then we freeze here in 2 drops of VS going through in 1 minute, so a total of 7 minutes. When we warm the cells, we have to do the opposite. As I mentioned, we now have to get rid of the cryoprotectant that's sitting in the cell. And if you expose them to your warming solution, water has a desire to create an equilibrium, and based on osmotic, it's rushing in the cell with the purpose, to make an equilibrium inside, outside, and in return, the cryoprotectant gets pushed out. The key is that you have to control this water influx. If you don't do, you will have no survival. And cells will gain their volume over time, and then they look also very normal when you get them ready for transfer. Then for the warming, our dish was even more complicated. It took us 11 minutes. We thawed them, most of you, in 37 degrees Celsius in 1 molar TS, and then we went in 1 molar, connecting 0.5, 0.5, 0.5 with no sucrose, diluting the sucrose out, and on the end we kept them in a wash solution with no sucrose. It took us 11 minutes. And the key here really is that we improve that protocol by plunging in now a bigger drop of 400 microliter of 1 molar sucrose at 37 degrees. And then we move from there after this immediately in our culture dish, which is ready for transfer. We use for the transfer sage blast media, remnants of the step media, first step for day 3, sequential media. So the blast medium was the last step in the sequential media. We still keep that for transfer of frozen embryos and adding 20% protein. And I want to mention, it's very important that this publication was done before. It was a prize abstract at PCRS, and it was also a prize paper at ASRM by a group out of North Carolina, South Carolina, Tyler, Mann. And they tried to publish it, but I think it ended nowhere. And so we started to look into this. We did in-house studies. We had a lot of embryos signed for disposition. So I started to, before I implemented this, about 600 embryos, 564 blastocysts, mostly PhD abnormal embryos. And I differentiated in embryos that were biopsied and some that were not biopsied. They all had an excellent survival. They looked awesome after 24 hours. That's what we used as a survival criteria. And their ability to hatch and totally to hatch out, it was amazing. And but we also saw that it was necessary to some extent when you look at the number of hatched embryos, biopsied and non-biopsied. Here is biopsied, non-biopsied. There is a significant number of embryos where didn't underwent BGD. I think they require still assisting hatching to make sure that this percentage is able to come out of the sonar and to implant. So after these results were very, very encouraging, and we started then, after presenting to the physicians, this in September last year. I report here close to 1,000 transfers. We now have 1,020. And you see here our distribution. The 38% were FETs with no tested embryos, where were not tested with biopsy. And the majority, 61%, were embryos where we knew they were euploid. I followed up with about 833 FETs in terms of ongoing pregnancy and implantation. This is our study population, 833, ongoing pregnancy and implantation, average age 36.2. We transferred in average 1.6 embryos. 1.06, I'm sorry. This is just a positive beta, but I personally believe in the importance of a positive beta. Depends where you set your positive beta. But you see here, close to 1,000, we get a positive beta of 78%, 79 in 35 to 37, and 75 in 38 to 40, and overall here over 40, 67.5. So you will argue, I'm sure you have more PhD transfers. That's true, but if I show you more slides, you will see not a significant difference. Anyway, if we look at untested and tested embryos, surprisingly, it is not what you might expect. I'm sorry, yeah, it doesn't work. But you see here 72% positive beta and 74 for embryos tested. That was not significant. I'm sorry, but that stuff shifted here. When we look at embryos now with the whole 9 yards of assessment and really true numbers from positive beta to clinical pregnancy, ongoing, and implantation, we have here close to 69% implantation with ongoing pregnancy of close to 66% for patients under 35, 61 for 35 to 37, close to 60 for 38 to 40, and a little bit of drop, but still 53% ongoing for patients over 40. It brings us to an average of 60.4% ongoing pregnancy with an implantation of close to 64%. When we look at untested and tested, you see here for untested embryos we have 58% ongoing pregnancy, and you see here a benefit of PhD. What you also will see when you look at the age, there is no question. We gained about 5%, 6% for transferring tested embryos. It is not significant because of the size. We need more ends. Implantation rate here 60% versus 66.3%. That was significant. I have 5 minutes left. I might need 10. Slow freezing, and I want to show you the difference. When we compared our technique where we used 11% of warming to 1 minute, it's a different size number, but we will get close there. I took transfer from 22 and 23, so we didn't change anything. It's in a very short time. So only thing changed that we went from 11 to 1 minute, and you see here survival is no difference. We didn't have to thaw more embryos to get to the same outcome with rapid thawing, because some people think we put a lot of stress on these embryos. It is equivalent. There is also no additional stress factor or filter that can act as a bias for the rapid warming. If we look now comparing traditional warming to rapid warming, just to make it briefly because of the time, we have ongoing pregnancy 55 versus 60 and implantation rate of 56 versus 63. So we gain overall a certain percentage in favor of the rapid warming. Our miscarriage rate is even lower when we go with a rapid warming. So can we lower than 1 molar sucrose for warming? I did, and it works. You can go to 0.5 or even 0.25. I cannot believe I have only 20 minutes already passed. You have a different clock. And so 0.25 molar and 1 molar, there is no difference, right? This is a study from Belgium that was presented at a meeting. So only difference, if you have a lower concentration of sucrose, the time to re-expansion is significant shorter when you thaw them in 1 molar. Even time to hatching is also significant lower. So they hatch significantly faster, need less time when you thaw them in 1 molar. And that's our numbers. We also showed when 0.5 or even 0.25 molar is equivalent to 1 molar, and it looks like even the lower concentration of 0.25 molar is beneficial for faster recovery and therefore significant higher hatching rate. So to show you some embryos blastocysts 1 minute thaw in 0.5 molar, were all for disposition. It's right after warming, quite fast expansion. Overall, you see there is barely one who didn't survive. And you see already here 24 hours later, most of them are totally hatched out. And I think the last slide is also here for totally hatched out. And when we have some embryos we didn't biopsy, and you see a difference in the last slide. Here we go. You see here a lot of embryos were still sitting in the zona and they were not biopsied. So I would still encourage to do assisting hatching on these embryos. First tried also for 0.25 molar, just some slides. It's also 0.25 molar. They all look fine, or some of them just didn't survive. But you see also, post-warming, 24 hours. Okay, so to summarize to that point, this rapid warming simplifies laboratory technique for warming blastocysts. It reduces unnecessary time blastocysts are exposed to room temperature and in turn reduces stress to the blastocyst. David Gardner showed that adding antioxidants to the wet warming solution is increasing the cell number in blastocysts. Time-saving and smoother workflow, which reduced the pressure stress of embryologists, especially in big programs with 10 or more FETs per day. Before, we always put like 2 embryologists on thawing in case of 10 FETs. Now they are all done by 1. Future will be vitrifying blastocysts in 2 minutes at room temperature, 37 degrees, I prefer room temperature, and warming will happen at 37 in 1 minute in 0.5 or 0.25 molar. Target is combining rapid vitrification with rapid warming. Having a kit available with 1 vial ES, 1 vial VS, and 1 vial TS is cost-saving and streamlines ordering. Rapid vitrification, I didn't talk about this today, but rapid warming is easy to implement in your daily routine and standardize blastocyst cryopreservation, and its outcome even more successful. And a little bit on the end, also here you see the time saving. When we talk about 11 minutes and you add that up for a day, you need like close to 2 hours to thaw them. And when we talk 1 minute, you can thaw them the same number in about 10 minutes. Including paperwork, it takes a little bit longer, but it's a huge time saving factor. And I was also in Norway. It was my first trip at the beginning of this year. Don't ask me why I went in January, but it was not sunny, it was cold. But people were very warm, and I got a lot of response, and that makes me very happy when I see this response, how people start to implement and are successful. And I want to talk briefly, now time is over, but I still have 1 slide or 2 slides for you that you might be interested. We talk about egg freezing. Is it safe, reliable, repeatable, and successful? Is it entirely true? We have more and more babies born from vitrified eggs, there is no question. But most of you, I'm sure, have the same tendency. We vitrify every day more and more, besides biopsy. So this number gets increasing day by day. And it's very important, that we really have a reliable protocol to make sure we preserve these gametes for later use successfully. And again, what happens during vitrification, I mentioned that briefly. We shrink them, and then we wait for re-expansion, and that's why the protocol takes so long. But this is actually not the right thing. But also for someone who does not lab work, I want to show you when eggs get dehydrated, like in 3 minutes. Next slide would be in 6 minutes. You see what I'm talking about, they regain their volume. It would be after 6 minutes. If you go to the next 10 minutes, you would barely recognize they were dehydrated, like here, right? But then when we go in the final concentration in VS, that's twice the concentration of the ES, you see a dramatic shrink again, like here, right? And so there was some very smart people, they actually figured out that the oocyte osmotic behavior indicates that the dehydration upon exposure to standard cryoprotectant occurs very fast. The point of minimum volume of the shrink bell curve is reached in 60 seconds, right? At this point, intracellular water ejection is complete, which coupled with the penetration of low molecular weight CPA results in similar intra- and extracellular solute concentration. That means that prolonging the exposure to the cryoprotectant solution does not improve the cytosolic class formation tendency and could be avoided. After 2 minutes of exposure to standard cryoprotectant solution, the critical intercellular solute concentration necessary for successful vitrification was attained. And to confirm that with some graphs from their publication, you see here A is 1 minute freezing, and B would be usually 10 to 11 minutes. And what you see here, after 1 minute, you get that shrinkage of the volume, a slight recovery, and then you drop it again after 1 minute in TS, and you get another shrinkage, about 40% of volume. And in the opposite, when your cell is shrinking, the concentration of intercellular solute goes up. And if you look at that curve, that's 1 minute, you get pretty much to the same volume like you get here. And now, it regains volume, it regains to 80%, and then you shrink it again to about 40 to 50, like here. So, here this long time in the ES has no benefit at all. And so what I did, and you see here again, there is here the 10 seconds and 60 seconds here, and when you, this is now opposite. The EP here is the 10 minutes, shrinkage, recovery, and then you shrink them again, right? And we wonder why we let them recover and shrink them again. There must be some stress on the oocyte we can prevent. And when you look at 1 minute here, DP, there is your 1 minute here, and then in VS, and we shrink them again. We just don't wait for this, right? Recovery. And I get to my end. So as I mentioned, what is different from the rapid vitrification? We don't wait for this. We don't wait for that the cells recover their volume. We freeze them because in that short time of 1 minute ES, 1 minute VS, they have no way to recover. So, and I did a bunch of studies since last year. In May 22, I started vitrifying X, and I can tell you that the future will be, without going in detail, I freeze all these X you see here, polar body well preserved. You will see German vesicles, they are well preserved, polar body here again. I can successfully vitrify X in 2 minutes and for them in 2 minutes, so it takes me a total of 3 minutes. You see also abnormal fertilized after warming. You see a German vesicle looks totally fine and normal without being compromised during the cryopreservation, especially during this very short time of a total of freezing and thawing of 4 minutes. Future of cryopreservation will be combining rapid vitrification with rapid warming. I mentioned that before. But on the end, I'm always full of joy when I get something like this from a patient back, because that's all about, not so much my talk here, but how we do our homework and how we do our best to make the best out of these embryos to make it possible that patients get pregnant. And this is a little bit a contribute from a patient that made me very exciting, and of course my team included. So I thank you very much. If you have questions, there's my email, shoot me emails. I usually answer them very fast and quite fast. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.